يا هلا 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 حن قلبي على جمعة الخير هلا حن قلبي على جمعة الخير هلا يا هلا ويا هلا ويا هلا ويا هلا يا هلا ويا هلا ويا
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Wednesday edition of Let's Talk with me, Julie Alli. We're going to be looking at innovation with Tech Innovation, all about coding and other digital skills. It is also Hair Loss Awareness Month, so Dr. Ishak will be in. He's a dermatologist and he's going to talk to us about alopecia. But first up, I think we all have been buzzing, wondering and worried about the smacking judgment. We've been told that if we've been found abusing our children, we as parents could possibly be serving a jail sentence. I have Dr. Shaida Umar in studio with me. She is the director at Teddy Bear Clinic. She's also one of the presenters on Health Talk right here on ITV, but this time around I'm going to be interviewing her on the issue around the smacking judgment. We're looking also at femicide and GBV, which is gender-based violence, and I think that all of these issues tie in. We'll try and unpack it and we'll try and let you, our female viewers, know just what your rights are, when to stand up and say stop the abuse. Shaida Umar, assalamu alaikum, welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam, shukran dalilan.
Wonderful having you. I always love having you on my show. There never is enough time when I have you around. But we're talking about very serious issues here. I was kind of wondering when I heard about the smacking judgment, how it's going to be policed. What exactly does it mean? Does it suggest that, a light smack or light disciplining your child could get you into serious trouble? Where and how is this going to be instituted? And is this going to be doing our children any good?
So, Julie, I think you're asking such pertinent questions, and it's relevant to all of us as families, as a nation and future generations. The important thing to understand here, the common law defense of reasonable chastisement, as you so beautifully articulated, the smacking law. The intention is not to destroy or disintegrate families where putting every person that is flicking the wrist or smacking on the bottom into jail. I think that is a misrepresentation, a misnomer, and a misperception of the current situation. It's about helping families, about healing families. The old saying, spare the rod and spoil the child. It's not about that. It's spare the rod and save the child, save the nation and save future generations. So it's all about helping and healing and not harming families. At the moment, we're sitting on task teams and we are also working on the way forward about how this will all be implemented, because having this legislation, approved at the Constitutional Court, there's also, in terms of that, protective measures have to be implemented, instituted, actually deliberated, consulted, which we've been doing for a number of years.
You involved very deeply in all of these
we
issues.
We sit on the National Task Team, and we are meeting next week with the Children's Institute from the University of Cape Town, looking at proactive and preventative programs. So the prevention programs will not only be implemented at schools, starting at your ECD facilities, primary, senior schools, even tertiary institutions, but it's also going to be widespread throughout communities. So your CBOs, your faith-based organizations, other civil society partners, everybody's going to have a role and a responsibility. Yes, we in the past, I think life orientation and life skills has been focusing on schools only, but it's broader, and it's also about enabling, equipping, and providing skills to significant others, to adults, on how to engage, communicate, and dialogue with children differently. Because as the reasonable chastisement law, the corporal punishment, what was it actually doing? How was it helping? If we just look at the scourge of violence and the incidents of violence where children have actually become perpetrators, children have violated and mutilated and even killed, have been engaging in such horrendous crimes. And then we ask ourselves, what is actually going on here? Where do children learn their behavior? Children learn best by observation.
Absolutely.
By being socialized in that way.
Shanda, you said spare the rod and save the child. So obviously it's all about alternative disciplining methods. What's that going to look like? And, how are parents going to be suitably equipped, and schools? And I often wonder about schools. You've heard, you probably are involved in that space as well, about the violence playing out at schools, the learner-upon-learner violence, where children have actually been killed. 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds. You have these children coming to schools with weapons. And I kind of wonder, in that little child's mind, was the intent actually to kill another child? Was it the intent to take a life? Do they truly understand just how complicated, how deep and how big this issue is, and how they as children, obviously you can't incarcerate them, but there's got to be some sort of program in place. But I have no doubt in my mind that it scars that child for the rest of his life.
Indeed, and I think so. When I said, how do children learn best? And the role modeling is such a crucial and critical, integral part of a child's developmental processes. And children, what are they exposed to? They see adults, they see icons, reference groups, authority figures, everybody. Every time there's a challenge, an issue, they resort to some form of violence. And children, this is how they learn conflict resolution, problem-solving skills. When they find themselves in a situation where they're feeling powerless, helpless, out of control, the frustration growing, they do what is something that they've been exposed to, and it becomes normalized into their behavioral repertoire. And everybody becomes desensitized to it, because this is how you deal with conflict situations. And so role modeling is something that is key.
What worries me about all of what you've just said now is we're talking children here, but you see this, we see this type of behavior being perpetrated by adults as well. So you've touched on something really crucial, and that is conflict resolution skills. So because you have an adult or adults that are unable to resolve conflict amicably, they then resolve to violence, to guttural behavior, guttural language and violence. Is there hope for people like that? Because they were never given the skills in the past. They don't know how. I mean, the bottom line is, I don't know how. What do I do in a situation like this? I'm totally helpless. The only way I know how is to become a horrible bully. So then he starts with this very abusive behavior, physical, emotional, and otherwise.
And of course, I think what you're saying about I don't know how, because that guttural behavior is certainly attributed to the fact that I'm going to get quick gains here. It's short-term gains, immediate gains, that I can stop this right now. I'm in power. I can stop this, and I'll be the victor, and I'll come out on top of the situation. But if one looks at the long term, of course, there aren't long-term gains. And I think that is something that when you said with adults and with significant others in the community, are there going to be interventions? Are there going to be programs available? And this is something that as a task team, we are looking at different sectors of society, intersectoral approaches, multifaceted, multidimensional, where to get corporates also on board, health facilities, all government departments, where opportunities and platforms are created in the workplace situation, because we're faced with so much gender-based violence issues, domestic violence, the femicide, the child abuse. And so on different levels from a micro, meso, and macro level, because now we've addressed the macro level of legislation and policy, but that needs to filter down into the how of doing it, executing it, implementing, and demonstrating, where people come out feeling that I can actually do this differently, because it's not, I think we need to be very clear. Discipline is not about punitive behavior. The two are not synonymous. That is what we need to separate and not confuse the issues, that you could still help without inflicting physical harm or grievous bodily harm.
In the old days, the rod was not spared, and that's the way we grew up. You know, our parents put the fear of, they just put the fear of the rod into us, so to speak. And we knew that if we misbehaved, we were going to get a hiding of our lives. I'm wondering, and thank God we've turned out okay, it could have gone the other way. But now when we talk, and you're talking about this multi-sectoral approach, suggesting that even adults who are unable to problem solve or, resolve conflict amicably in a healthy way will also undergo these programs. Men normally are very resistant to all these type of changes. How are you going to get that across to them, number one? And obviously when they make this change and they start interacting with their partners and their siblings and their children, possibly even co-workers, they almost, I should imagine they have to explain their change in behavior. Should they be? Should they be suggesting that you'll notice that I've moved away from aggression and I'm now interacting in a different way because I've learned that aggression doesn't get me results, and it's just not only hurting the people around me but hurting me as well.
And I like what you're saying, because coming back to the basics, honesty is the best policy. To say, I didn't know better, but there seems to be other options that are available, and there's absolutely nothing wrong. We have nothing to lose by adopting or implementing, trying these different approaches and actually seeing how it pans itself out. So, obviously it's going to take a lot of hard work. I don't think it's smooth sailing or it's a walk in the park, but it's hard work. But if we look at other first world countries like Sweden, they've come such a long way, New Zealand as well, and it has worked. So it's been tried and tested, and we do believe that there's hope for all of us in this country.
Please God, yes, inshallah. I think men and young boys as well often wonder and think that if they take the soft approach, the diplomatic approach, the respectful approach, females and other people around them are going to tease them and going to lose respect for them. How do you respond to that?
So yes, I think if we just look at the whole history of patriarchy, we look at the holy scriptures, the Quran, the Bible, and all other religious scriptures, it speaks to the dominance, the power, and I think sometimes it's subject to misinterpretation.
Absolutely.
Where the male figure or male counterpart is given a higher platform, a more superior platform, and men feel that if they concede or show a little bit of weakness, or by giving in, it's going to be seen as a mark of weakness, and that would disempower them and emasculate them.
Absolutely.
And that's a misnomer.
Let's go for the ad break. We'll be back in a minute or two. Fascinating stuff with Dr. Shada Umar. She is a director at the Teddy Bear Clinic, and she also hosts the Health Talk right here on ITV. We'll continue this discussion after the ad break. We'll be looking at femicide, what does it mean, and of course gender-based violence. It's all in the news at the moment. Does it mean that after this month or two we're going to forget about it? We'll hear what Shahida has to say to that. We have another doctor on the show this morning. He is Dr. Irshad Mohammed Essek. He is a dermatologist and he's coming in to talk alopecia. But right now we have Dr. Shaida Umar. She's from the Teddy Bear Clinic. She is the director there. We're talking femicide, gender-based violence, and of course the smacking judgment. So we're looking forward to good things. We're looking forward to some very positive outcomes as far as the smacking judgment is concerned. As far as, obviously, I suppose reconscientizing the men, the older generation in our communities, because if they don't start changing their behaviors, I don't think it's going to filter down to the youngsters. How long are we going to wait to see those changes? Because it's fine for policymakers to sit around, with due respect to you, Shaida, you're one of those policymakers. It's fine for you guys to sit around a table and, pass all of these policies, but to actually get them to start filtering down, making sense, being meaningful, and people to start adopting and applying them.
So I think if we go back to the legislation is serious about enforcing and regulating the rule. It's important that people need to understand that actions will have consequences, and to understand that it is a contravention of the law. Of course, government departments like social development and of course law enforcement agencies will apply its mind in ensuring that people abide and adhere to the rules. So to stop immediate violation of physical abuse, the law will take its course. But again, as I said, it's not about just putting people or, incarcerating them and throwing the keys away. It's about government departments like social development and your civil society partners coming into effect to say, how can we help this family? What is actually going on here? What help does that, like you said, the adult or the older adult in the family need? And those kinds of interventions will be provided. So supportive measures, protective measures will be instituted and implemented. You're asking me about the turnaround time. I wish I had a crystal ball that I could tell you, but
right.
We do know it's a journey, it's work in progress. Mm-hmm. So we cannot give a definite timeline, but it's looking at input, output, and desired outcomes. And I think just looking at the global desktop literature review, one can actually look effectively like 3 to 5 years, where one actually looks at the statistics and even the crime statistics, going back to the gender-based violence issues, the femicide issues, and child abuse. I think those are telltale, immediate, something that would be able to, is tangible and concrete in terms of figures. And something that the Gender-Based Violence Commission, so I sit on the steering committee as well in the Office of the Presidency, addressing gender-based violence issues. And there are very exciting things happening currently, which will all be made available by the end of October at various levels, various government departments being held accountable in terms of implementation. So something that I would like to share is that currently as we sit, domestic violence has not been treated as seriously and intensely by law enforcement agencies, by the courts as well. And there's been a lot of backlog. So one of the protective measures that will be instituted is to have an inventory register of every domestic violence case at every station. So there will be, careful, considered, and serious reporting where every domestic violence issue, GBV issue, will be reported and it will be followed through, it will be fast-tracked. And of course, backlogs of cases with the NPA, National Prosecutions Authority, also will be followed up and fast-tracked, where they will have mobile courts made available. So these are things that, obviously...
Exciting indeed.
Indeed, yeah.
Shana, when you look at GBV, let's look at abuse, domestic abuse for that matter. A lot of women are too afraid to report. That's number one. After they report, depending what happens, what interventions are in place, I'm wondering if one of the issues that hold them back is that once I report and an intervention is being put in place, will this relationship ever be the same again? It may change for the better or it may change for the worse. And I think that holds a lot of women back.
And I think it's more than that, Julie. You're right. That would hold many women back. But it's also the fear of shame, humiliation, being judged, because they would be judged according to their perception, that they would be viewed as not being loyal, not being a good wife, because we are all socialized in the patriarchal system. We are, and toxic masculinity, something that has become the norm and that we live by, that this is what is expected. Or if we look at the whole socialization process, mothers, grandmothers, this is how we lived and we're okay and we're fine with it. So it's an expectation. It's an unrealistic expectation. And the misperception in the victim often is that then I have failed my family.
Absolutely.
And, the shame that goes with it, and I've betrayed my family. So I think that's one of the fears and reasons where victims continue to allow the victimization process. And of course, a lot are also financially dependent. You and I have had this conversation before. The dependence, and also fearful that they would lose their partners. Fearful that
they'd rather stick in an abusive relationship than risk losing the partner, being judged and being shamed.
And fear of reprisal from the partner, that the consequences may not be something that they can live with.
Do you believe things are changing in our community, especially because more and more young people are going on to educate themselves? Young women are financially independent, and because of that, they are able to walk away from a very abusive relationship, knowing that they can stand on their own 2 feet.
So I do believe, I would like to say there's greater awareness, there's more insight, and women and men are certainly more enlightened in terms of their rights and responsibilities, aware that, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and the awareness of more and more resources that are being made available. I think in the days of yore, there were not resources in terms of supportive counseling, accessing advice, mediation. All sorts of platforms are now more available, accessible, and of course people are in a position, if we look at females, young and old, are in a position to make more informed decisions and choices.
Absolutely. We've come almost to the end of the show. Very quickly, Shaida, tell us about what does it mean when we say GBV and femicide, the interlink, or is it two totally different issues?
Well, I think it coalesces. There is obviously a linkage there, and the two cannot be separated. But and I think we need to just explain that. So GBV, as you have articulated earlier, it's about gender-based violence. It's about, if we just look at the whole scenario that the country is facing, it's about male on female, the violation by male on female, and the high incidence that we are currently facing. So it's assaulting, it would be physical abuse, it would be emotional abuse, it would even be sexual abuse, even in relationships where they are in a marriage. So those factors are quite prevalent, and that attributes to gender-based violence. If we speak to femicide, it's the of course murdering of male, female by male, and that is something that we are also finding on the increase, and I think there's been an increased reporting of that. And if we just look at the statistics, I think it's that every 2 or 3 days a female is murdered by her partner.
Absolutely.
It's somebody that is closely connected and that she has a relationship with, usually in a marriage or even outside of a marriage, but it's a close relationship.
Are we unique globally, or are we seeing more and more of this around the world, GBV and femicide?
So I think this is not a South African phenomenon. It is a global phenomenon, but we are very high on the list, unfortunately.
And there are a whole host of factors as far as that is concerned. Our very dark past in history, the apartheid history.
It's this whole history of violence, the culture of violence, the socialization process is something that you and I discussed also.
Yes.
Who is it that socializes families?
True.
And that also, the way we've been conditioned into thinking.
Absolutely. It's the mothers, but also she gives away a lot of her power when she can't manage a situation. She then obviously refers to the male in the family. So women should be very careful in those type of situations, rather than, I'm going to tell your father, I'm going to report this to so-and-so.
And you raise something so critical when we say to parents about discipline, that you need to be together, you need to be joint forces.
Absolutely. Don't speak in different voices in different languages. When I say languages, I mean dad says the one thing, mom says the other thing, because then you're allowing your child to manipulate you and get away with murder, literally.
Indeed.
And that's where we're leaving your closing remarks to our viewers this morning.
It's about helping your child heal. By not hitting your child, you're actually teaching your child better ways of solving problems. And I just want to say to parents, stay calm, relax, and breathe. If you don't know what to do, actually step aside for a while. Take a few seconds away and take deep breaths and come back and be honest to your child to say, I'm feeling quite powerless and frustrated. Let's talk about this. It's communication, engagement, and connection.
Absolutely. Wonderful having you here yet again, and I hope that we'll have many more future talks right here on Let's Talk.
Shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. That was Dr. Shada Umar sharing her wisdom with us as far as issues around the smacking judgment, GBV, and femicide is concerned. Never enough time when she's on my show. Inshallah, we'll get her in again. Don't go away. We'll be talking to Dr. Ishaq next about alopecia. GH Tech Innovation will be in next to talk about coding and also other digital skills. So I think that's going to be pretty interesting. But now we've been told that it is a Hair Loss Awareness Month. What does that mean for you and I? When we talk hair loss, what exactly are we talking? Today in studio we have Dr. Ishaq, Dr. Irshad Mohammed Ishaq. He is a dermatologist. He operates from the Flora Clinic, I think it is, on the West Rand. And we're going to be looking at alopecia. Time permitting, we might talk about other skin conditions and diseases. But right now, the focus is on alopecia or hair loss. But when we talk hair loss, let's not confuse it with, you know, as men age, they start losing their hair, they have receding hairlines. Is that part of alopecia or not? Well, let's try and uncover all of that with Dr. Irshad Ishaq. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for accommodating us at such short notice. I do appreciate it. You do work at from the Flora Clinic.
Yes,
Am I correct in that?
Correct. My main practice is at Flora Clinic.
Brilliant. Only at the Flora Clinic.
I do sessions at Linksfield Hospital as well.
Okay.
And at Rosebank Hospital.
Okay, busy doctor. Hair loss awareness, and what comes to mind is alopecia. Apart from the fact that old age is another reason for why you lose your hair, that's all about hormones. But as the doctor, I'll ask you to go into more detail for us. So what exactly is alopecia?
If I could put it simply, alopecia essentially is the medical term for hair loss. But if you go deeper into it, alopecia can be divided into hair loss syndromes. So you are growing hair but are losing it. And then you have symptoms where you have poor hair growth. But to the lay person, they will present themselves and say, I'm losing my hair. So alopecia essentially is just a blanket term, a medical term for hair loss. Now, if you look at hair loss, you can get those problems that mainly occur in the hair follicle. So the factory that actually makes the strand of hair, which is the hair shaft. Now, patients or people may not understand or not realize that when they're having loss, it may also be as a result of the strand that's breaking. So those are hair breakage syndromes. So you have a problem in the product, which is the hair shaft, hair breakage syndromes, but predominantly your problem usually lies within the hair follicle, which is the factory that actually makes the hair shaft itself. Now, one must not be confused and consider themselves having alopecia because in the normal sequence of events, on a daily basis, males and females, you lose between 150 to 200 hair strands of your scalp every day.
And it regrows, I
And
assume.
it regrows. And the reason for that is that in the human scalp, all your hair is not going through the same part of the hair cycle at the same time.
Ah.
You have about 90% of hairs that are going through the active growing phase. You have about 9% of hairs that are going through a resting phase, and about 1% of hairs or hair follicles are going through a shedding phase. So the shedding
Natural, normal shedding.
in the natural sequence
Like
of events.
animals shed their fur.
Except animals, predominantly you'll find that in their hair cycle, all their hair follicles or their fur follicles are going through a similar cycle at the same time.
Ah.
So for example, if you look at towards autumn going into winter, all their follicles are going through the growth phase in order for them to be able to keep warm. Then through their hibernation, all the follicles go to the resting phase. And when spring comes along, all their follicles will go through a shedding phase. So they will molt. Whereas in humans, we have different percentages of the hair follicles going through different phases at a different time. Therefore, we don't really molt. And you'll find that on a daily basis, that 1% of hairs or hair follicles that are going through the shedding phase, that's the hairs that you would find, the few hairs that you're expected to find in your shower drain or in your hairbrush itself. So when a patient begins to see a larger volume or a larger bulk of those hairs on their pillow in the morning or on the shoulders of their clothing, they begin to become a bit more concerned, and that's usually the presenting feature for a patient with alopecia. Alternatively, you'll find that in certain types of alopecia, it's sometimes the hairdresser or the barber that tends to pick up these problems at the time of a haircut. So a lot of the times the patients are unaware that they've got alopecia or they have got some sort of hair loss, and someone else notices it, especially if it's on the rear part or the posterior part of the scalp where they can't really see it. But coming back to your first question, alopecia essentially is a blanket term for hair loss. And like I said, the main focus or the main problem usually is within the factory or the hair follicle that produces the hair shaft.
Now, there are different types of alopecia, and do men and women present with the same type of alopecia? And what about children? Is alopecia normal in children? Because they're going through a growth phase, right? So my thinking is that they shouldn't be suffering from alopecia unless there's something medically wrong with them.
Absolutely.
So 3 questions thrown at you.
There are different types of alopecia, and the important thing here is for the clinician or the doctor to be able to diagnose this properly. You could divide alopecias into different categories or using different criteria. For example, I mentioned to you the hair breakage syndromes versus the hair follicle problems. You could also divide alopecias into those that are scarring, where the skin itself and the hair follicle becomes scarred.
Why would that happen? And how does that present with pain as well?
Generally, it's usually asymptomatic, so there's no pain, maybe a little bit of itch. Patients may perceive a little bit of redness, or the barber or hairdresser may perceive a little bit of redness on the scalp. But a scarring type of alopecia tends to cause a textural change to the skin. So if you have to feel the scalp skin itself, the scalp skin will be a little bit different in its texture. Sometimes the scarring can be so subtle that it is just within the hair follicle itself. So the scarring is very, very patchy on the scalp. Usually those type of, if it is florid on the scalp, you can pick it up clinically. But usually on skin biopsy, when we examine the skin under a microscope, we begin to pick up subtle changes in terms of scarring. So if you look at the scarring alopecias versus the non-scarring alopecias, generally as a blanket guideline, the scarring alopecias tend to have a far worse prognosis and are more difficult to treat because there's usually some sort of inflammation going on that damages the hair follicle. In some cases, irretrievably, and in some cases, if you pick it up fairly early, you may be able to salvage the inflammation on the and the hair follicle itself. So you can divide them into the scarring types and the non-scarring types. You can also divide them into the diffuse types and the patchy types. So for example, something like alopecia areata in its classic type, you would find patches of hair loss. So certain areas become completely bald. Fungal infections of the scalp.
Both in women and men.
Women and men, even in children in some cases. Another example of a patchy alopecia would be somebody who's affected by a fungal infection. Usually the fungal infection will start in one area, begin to work its way out towards the periphery and give you patches. So patchy alopecia versus a diffuse alopecia, where you can be having single random strand hair loss. So patients will complain that my hair volume is not as good, or my hair seems to be thinning. So they've got overall coverage, but the coverage is very sparse.
Okay. When you have patchy alopecia, I'm wondering, again, you said it's asymptomatic. With all of these that we're talking about, no pain at all, doesn't present with pain.
Usually most of them don't present with pain. Like I said, you may get the occasional itch, but a lot of cases, patients only notice the hair loss around them, but they don't really feel any symptoms, unless it is associated with some sort of other symptom or disease, whereby the other disease may provide symptoms.
Let's go for an ad break. We'll talk some more. Dr. Irshad Mohammed Isak is in studio. He's a dermatologist. It is Hair Loss Awareness Month, and we're talking about a condition called alopecia. And as you've heard, it's a very blanket term being used for any form of hair loss. Don't go away. We'll be back talking about treatments and, of course, the type of shampoos, hair dyes, how all of that perhaps impacts in a hair loss and all sorts of uncomfortable hair conditions. Alopecia is the subject matter, and dermatologist Dr. Irshad Mohammed Irshad Isak is in studio. He practices at the Flora Clinic in Florida, of course. So if you do need to consult with him, you'll know where to get hold of him. We're talking alopecia and the different types of alopecia. I understand that in certain cases, if you suffer from an autoimmune disease, it will then present, obviously your hair, one of the symptoms would be hair loss, patches of hair loss, or however it would play out in different patients.
I think you raised a very good point, because connective tissue diseases and autoimmune diseases certainly can present with alopecia. A lot of times patients present to the dermatologist first or the GP first with hair loss as being the presenting feature for the overall connective tissue disease syndrome. The commonest one that most people will be familiar with will be lupus erythematosus. And hair loss in LE is very, very common. What's actually happening in that condition is that the hair follicle is being misrecognized as being foreign. So the body's immune system is attacking the factory that grows the hair.
The healthy cells.
The healthy cells. And what happens is that the hair follicle can be, in some cases, scarred completely, such that you may not get the potential to grow hair further. That's usually the
females as well.
In fact, lupus is far more common amongst females. On average, between the 20 to 40 year age group, probably 9 times more common. Systemic lupus is more common amongst female patients. The other patterns of hair loss also that may occur in connective tissue diseases is that apart from getting the patchy scarring types of hair loss, you can also get that diffuse hair loss, where I was talking about single strand hair loss earlier. You can get single strand hair loss just as a manifestation of an overactive immune system. So someone has to be very, very aware that some of these connective tissue diseases can present with different patterns of hair loss.
Okay, so let's look at how you would, so the patient comes to you. What do you look for? Let's look at signs, symptoms, tests. Are there lab tests that the patient would undergo? And is it reversible? Whichever type of alopecia we're talking about, even the one, where you're presenting with lupus and you're now getting the hair loss. Is it, well, when I say reversible, can you then eventually overcome this issue? Are you going to reach a point at some stage, 5 months, 10 months, 2 years later, where you get your full crowning glory all over again?
I think it's very, very important that the doctor or the clinician or the trichologist examines the patient, but before doing so, takes a solid history from the patient. It is important to take a good history regarding their diet, because you must remember that iron deficiencies, vitamin B12 deficiencies, folate deficiencies are all other causes which are easily correctable for alopecia. You've got to look at the patient's pregnancy history, because in certain pregnancies or in certain obstetric histories, you may find the patient may have had a history of infertility or miscarriages, spontaneous miscarriages, which may also point further towards an autoimmune type of disorder.
Right.
Then you've got to look at, for example, the patient's history with respect to their thyroid, family histories, because hypothyroidism or underactive thyroid can result in hair loss as well. Then you've got to look at other disorders, for example, occupations, recreation, patients are using helmets, kids sharing caps at school, can result in the infective type of alopecias coming on board. For example, tinea capitis, which is a type of fungal infection. So taking a good history overall of the patient first will guide the clinician into, do they need to do any tests, and which tests do they need to do. Otherwise, you end up spending a lot of money, because hair investigation and treatments can be extremely expensive. So let your history then guide where to go to thereafter. And when you examine the patient, you've got to examine the patient in all hair-bearing areas. So in as much as everyone would think about hair loss on the scalp, you've got to look at the other areas as well. So eyebrows, eyelashes, pubic hair, body hair overall. If you examine the patient completely, you get a better idea as to whether you are dealing with a localized type of alopecia or a more generalized type of alopecia. Whereas a more generalized type of alopecia will suggest that you may be dealing with a systemic disease, for example, like an autoimmune disease. And then also, depending on what you find, you may need to look at other aspects of the patient, for example, their nails, inside their mouth, because you can get another disorder, for example, called lichen planus, where lichen planus can also affect the hair follicle, giving you lichen planopilaris. So if you examine the patient completely, you'll begin to get a good idea as to what your working diagnosis is, and then that should basically guide the test that you may want to do for the patient thereafter.
And appropriate treatment.
And then appropriate treatment.
By everything you've now just said would suggest that the treatment would differ from patient to patient.
Absolutely.
Obviously, depending on, based on your findings.
So you would probably start thereafter with your working diagnosis. You'll probably start with simple non-invasive blood tests, full blood counts, thyroid function, vitamin B12 levels, folate levels, your iron levels, looking for antibodies that will suggest a connective tissue disease or an autoimmune disease. That's a good place to basically start. Usually, if that comes back relatively normal, you may want to then undertake what's called a scalp biopsy. A scalp biopsy is now where we are looking at the hair follicle directly. And there are different techniques that we use in the lab to get different views of the hair follicle. So the biopsies are done generally in my practice under local anesthetic. It's sent off to the lab, and then we get an idea of, are there any features of inflammation. We will stain the area for bacteria, fungi, and that will give us a better idea as to what our final diagnosis is going to be. Based on what you have then, for example, if you have a connective tissue disease, which is as a result of an overactive immune system, you may need to use cortisones or non-cortisone treatments in some patients. Sometimes, like I said, when you are able to make the diagnosis, you may then realize that this particular problem of alopecia is a small problem relative to other organ involvement.
Okay.
So you will then investigate the patient with respect to the other organs. But if it's an infective problem, an antifungal, an antibiotic, if it is a nutritional deficiency, you will replace that particular deficient nutrient. If it is, for example, a thyroid deficiency, you'll then refer the patient maybe to an endocrinologist to have them worked up for thyroid disease. So the treatments will vary.
Absolutely.
And it's important the diagnosis gets made properly. Otherwise, you can be sitting with a situation where you are using different shampoos, caffeine shampoos, hair follicle stem cell treatments. Some patients, even out of desperation, will embark upon hair follicle transplants, but if the underlying diagnosis is not made properly, you are probably going to end up wasting a lot of money on treatments that are not going to work for the patient.
So absolutely important that you get the correct diagnosis and the correct treatment in place. And of course, it's going to differ from patient to patient. Let's just look at it very generally, alopecia. Once the patient has been properly diagnosed and treated, how soon is the hair going to start growing again, beautifully lush like it used to be?
And that will obviously depend upon the diagnosis, because the prognosis with treatment for alopecias in overall, there's a spectrum. On one end, you are going to end up having patients who've got the severe scarring alopecias. In those patients, you've got to be very upfront and straightforward. Although there are treatments that can be started for patients, they can be quite difficult for them in terms of side effects, but the prognosis generally is poor because the entire hair follicle is no longer viable to be able to grow a hair shaft.
Okay.
In those patients, the quicker that they can assimilate or digest the diagnosis, we sometimes refer patients, unfortunately, to wig libraries. For example, patients, similar to patients who are receiving chemotherapy, in the period of time where they are losing their hair whilst on chemo, they may need to have some sort of head coverage. We will use for them a wig library. On the other end of the spectrum, you have those alopecias that have got excellent prognosis. For example, alopecia areata, tinea capitis, alopecias as a result of syphilis, for example. If you treat appropriately, you'll find that those patients grow their hair back. You must remember that the hair will initially grow through as very thin baby hair, very downy and soft, and as time goes by, the hair becomes a lot more terminal and matured. So it becomes a bit thicker and it becomes a bit longer.
So it's about being patient.
So it's about being
right.
patient.
We've almost come to the end of the show. I didn't think we'd have enough time to cover, but we've actually run out of time. Is there a link between alopecia and treatments, especially if it's due to an autoimmune disease and cancers?
Generally, there isn't a link between the autoimmune disease and the cancers and alopecias. If you look at the cancers, one of the main sequelae or complications of a cancer is going to be the hair loss as a result of the treatment. Unless, and in exceptionally rare cases, there are a few skin cancers that occur within the hair follicle. So for example, a trichomatoxoma is a type of cancer that occurs within the hair follicle. But usually, because these are so localized and limited, the hair loss is not the presenting feature. It's usually a lump or a bump that is growing within the hair follicle.
Okay.
So you don't really see an overall loss of hair in a particular area. So you pick up the trichomatoxoma, for example, on biopsy, but alopecia or hair loss is not the presenting symptom.
Right. And finally, in terms of the types of shampoos and hair dyes we use, is that perhaps a precursor to alopecias? Are there specific good shampoos one should invest in and steer away from hair dyes and just grow grey gracefully and naturally?
In fact, the hair dyes, if I could come to that first, they themselves don't really contribute to alopecia unless they cause an inflammatory reaction or an allergic contact dermatitis on the scalp.
Okay.
Because remember, a hair dye doesn't work at the follicle level.
It's
a hair
it's
dye
very
is
superficial.
adding color to the hair shaft.
Absolutely.
But in some cases, patients are actually allergic to the components in the dye.
Right.
If I could give you an example of one chemical that has been implicated in causing allergic contact dermatitis, especially from hair dyes, is paraphenylene diamine, or PPD. PPD used to be a main preservative in hair dyes, and some patients were extremely sensitive to this. So immediately after or sometimes during the hair dyeing process, whether at a salon or even at home, patients will begin to experience a burning or an itching sensation, sometimes with swelling of the skin of the scalp. They usually rush off to go and rinse it off, but by then the inflammatory reaction has already been set in motion. The hair loss that subsequently occurs...
Very quickly, how's that treated?
You would use cortisone for those particular patients.
And we're definitely out of time, but very quickly, shampoos.
Shampoos, Usually the caffeine-based shampoos and shampoos that contain things like hair follicle stem cells, and you do have a lot of nutritional shampoos out there as well that help to support and provide the building blocks to the hair follicle factory to produce good hair. But it also depends on the patient's own preference for shampoos, because different shampoos give you a different feel and texture to the hair shaft. So it may not be a one size fits all, but if you're using a medicated shampoo for an alopecia, then I think it's always important that the diagnosis is made properly, then the proper medicated shampoo is prescribed for that particular patient.
And that's all we have time for. We couldn't even touch on old age and men and receding hairlines, but perhaps another time. Dr. Irshad Mohammed, Jazakallah. Dr. Irshad Ishaq Mohammed Ishaq, Jazakallah for being with us on the show this morning. He is a dermatologist. He practices at Flora Clinic, and he was on show to talk to us about alopecia. And it is Hair Loss Awareness Month. So if you suspect that you have the condition, please consult with Dr. Ishaq or anyone that you're comfortable with, any other dermatologist that you're comfortable with. Still to come, we'll be talking coding and other skills, digital skills, so don't go away. Welcome back. Nkobile Mhlangu is in studio with me. I got the name right. I'm so proud. She's here to talk about her journey through tertiary education and then forming her own company and the good she's doing, what she's putting back into the community. And it's an amazing journey. I think anybody out there who's out of a job, who doesn't believe in themselves and believe that, life is hard, life is unfair, we need to listen to her story to give you the inspiration to get out of that. You get up and out of the house and go and make things happen for you. Morning, welcome to the program.
Morning, thank you so much.
Lovely to have you here because you have a very inspiring story to share with us. You talk about GH Tech innovation, you talk about coding, basic skills in coding, and you also have something called Ubunye Bencha. How did your journey start?
My journey started when I entered into a tertiary institution where I didn't know what to study, or rather should I say I didn't have any other options of what to study. But How come you were at, you were accepted at a tertiary institution and yet you weren't sure what you were going to study? Yes, I applied late, hence I ended up being in a private institution because I had thought that I would go to study in Africa. But little did I know that my plans were not, the way I wanted them to be.
It wasn't part of the master plan.
Yes, so I had planned to go to study in Africa, but that didn't happen. So
study what?
I wanted to study linguistics.
Okay.
So that didn't happen. However, I told myself that I don't want to chill at home and do nothing. So I decided to go to a private institution where I studied information technology.
Now, did you have any idea what IT was all about?
No.
Were you ever exposed to it prior to joining the institution?
No, nothing at all. So what happened is they gave me a list of courses that were available for that year and for that intake. So I saw that I don't want to do sales, I don't want to do marketing, I don't want to do anything, but let me just try on IT. So I went into IT and first semester was a little bit easier, and then it got deeper and deeper. That's when I started struggling.
And what did the IT course cover? Because when we say IT is very broad.
Yes.
What were the specifics of the course that you undertook?
Okay, so I did networking and I did coding.
Okay.
So while I was studying that, I had challenges because it was really struggling. Number one, I didn't have the basic skills of IT. I didn't even know what IT is. So we used to write cycle tests every end of the week, and I used to do very bad with those tests. So I met these two young men.
Did you ever, before you met these two young men, did you ever think of dropping out? Did you think, I made the wrong choice, I might as well just throw in the towel?
Of course I did. Of course I did.
So what made you stay?
It's because I saw that they were doing well and I was not doing well. And that really struck me because I really wanted to do well as well. So I took a decision and I said, you know what, I'm approaching these guys. Then I approached them. I asked them, how do you guys do this? How do you do it? Because you always get 98%, 100% sometimes, and I get like 28%. Ooh. How's that possible? And I study so hard, but still I don't make it. So they said to me, it's fine. We'll teach you how to do this thing. Then they taught me, they gave me the past previous question papers. We did the work together. Then I started doing well. And then on the third year, we decided to open an NPC, which is a
the two guys and you.
Yes.
So you formed a very good relationship with them.
Yes.
And you are now very confident that you can do this.
Yes.
You're doing it.
Yes. So we formed our NPC, which is Ghetto Heroes Tech Innovation, which focuses on giving basic coding skills to young people in our community, since we believe that coding is the language of the future, because we are now approaching the 4IR, which is the fourth industrial revolution. So we really feel it's a need for our young people in our community to learn how to code. And
now,
also,
let me stop you there. A lot of people are telling me the same thing. They're saying that coding is the language of the future.
Yes.
Does that mean if our children are not exposed to coding, they're going to be left by the wayside?
Yes.
If we expose our children to coding at this point in time, let's assume they're still in primary school, how's that going to enable them to get better results in other subjects at school? And how is it going to hold them in good stead for their future if they decide to go into IT or other fields of study?
Well, coding is really broad. So and also it's growing dramatically. So things are changing now into digital. So as soon as you give the kids their basic skills now, by the time they finish school or by the time they get to university, they don't struggle with certain things like opening a computer, typing an assignment for a university, and also we help them get your basic digital skills, because you can't do coding if you don't have the basic digital skills. So it's very much important that we equip these young people at a very early age. And it's so easy to learn something at a very young age, because when you grow up, you are ready and you can do it even better.
Now, you're putting back in your community by way of GH Tech Innovation and Ubunye Bencha, which you'll tell us about more detail a little later on in the show. You've just now pointed out to me that coding, even though people are saying is the language of the future of business and the future of life, so to speak, but you can't do coding without basic computer or digital skills. What are digital skills? What do kids need to know before we even expose them to coding?
Well, they need to know how to use a computer or a digital device. Opening a computer, typing, and controlling the computer, because a computer, you tell a computer what to do, then it gives you the output. So you basically input, then it gives you the output. So if you can't input anything on the computer, you won't be able to get the results. Same as coding. If you want to program something, you need to input it on the computer so that you can get the results on the screen.
You make it sound very simple, but I'm sure it's not as simple as that. So you and your two friends have decided to go back into the townships, obviously, start putting back, and you then form GH Tech Innovation and Ubunye Venture.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you, how long did this whole process take? How much capital did you need to start up? Who's funding you? And where to from here? But all of that you're going to think about, and you'll respond to me after the ad break.
Okay.
We are talking coding, we're talking digital skills, basic digital skills, and how if you expose your children, I should imagine even grown-ups, people who never exposed to this area of technology, that you're giving them possibly a whole new lease on life. We're going for an ad break. When we get back, we'll pick up from where we've left off. Kobile Mhlangu is in studio with me. She's talking basic digital skills and also coding, and how if you expose yourself and especially your children, how they will have the added edge or advantage in the workplace, in school and in the workplace going forward. Now, if you expose children to these skills, and let's assume they don't go into the IT field, how is it going to serve them going forward?
It will serve them because they will be fully equipped for the future, which the future is coding.
How so?
They'll be able to do a lot of things like they'll be able to operate different machines, and they'll be able to...
Different computers.
Computers, yes, and they'll be able to be innovative, to come up with their own ideas and do their own things so that people can pay them for those things.
Like what, for example?
For example,
websites?
Website, creating and designing a website for it to run, then they can pay that particular person. Or the child. Apart
from website, with coding, basic computer skills and coding, what else can you do? What else can you perhaps offer as a service and get paid for it, or even just enhance your own life?
Okay, what we can do is that we can do a blog, which is more of social media and posting stories and your story, and also we do gaming and apps, so they can...
So you can actually design your own blog, your own website, you can design your own games.
Yes.
And are you able to on-sell all of these products?
Of course.
And I'm wondering, with so many young people being exposed to this technology, is there not perhaps going to be a glut in the market at some stage? Too much of it?
Well, it will be. But however, I think it will also make people to be more innovative and want to come up with new things and new skills. Because now with coding, you cannot say, okay, now I do a website and that's all. No, you come up with more ideas of, I want to do a game that operates like this, like this, like this. And people have to pay me for this particular game. And as soon as people sign in that game, then you get money.
When we expose our children to coding and basic digital skills, and they don't go into the IT field, let's assume they end up become doctors, lawyers, accountants, scientists, teachers, etc. So they're going totally different fields. Do you think that them having gotten the basics in coding, in designing their own websites and their own programs, etc., will enhance their other careers? And if so, how?
Well, I think it will help them because, for example, you gave an example with a teacher. Now things are getting digitally. So if you get into a classroom now, you'll see kids no longer have hard copy textbooks. They have tablets on their tables, the smart boards. In order for you to operate that smart board, you need the basic skills of digital. So teachers that didn't get the basic skills of digital struggle to operate a simple computer, which is a smart board. So I think it equips and it prepares them for the future, because we are not yet in the 4IR
fully.
But we are not fully, yes, in the 4IR, but we are going there, and things are changing, as you can see now. When you go to different stores, it's self-service. Everything you do, it's self-service. You do things online. All the things are automated now, because now we have to adapt to the new era, which is fourth industrial revolution.
And with these skills, even though you're not going to go into the IT field, at least you will be part of the fourth industrial revolution.
Yes.
You'll understand what's going on around
Yes.
you. You will not be at a disadvantage. If you can't help anybody around you, at least you can help yourself and have a basic understanding of exactly what is going on as far as technology is concerned, and the changing role of technology as we progress. Coming back to you and your business, you then decided with your two friends that you're going to open up your own business. You're going to also put back in the community. How challenging was that for you? Because you needed startup funds and you needed to have some sort of a portfolio for people to invest with you, to give you money to get your business up and running.
So it was really hard for us to start because, one, we were still students, we were studying, and two, we didn't have any experience, or rather a job experience of what we're doing, or a background of what we're trying to do. So it was really hard for us to start. But with the basic digital skills, we were able to connect, and we we did most of our things online, registered the business online, we registered for a bank account online, we did everything online.
Did that come at a cost, or did even via online it comes at a cost?
Yes, it comes at a cost, but it's better than you doing it manually. Or
getting a consultant to do it for you.
Exactly.
How much did you save by doing all of that? So you say you registered your company, you registered a business account. What else did you do?
We got the triple BEE certificate, all the certificates.
All of that that all costs money.
Yes.
So how much did you save by doing it yourself?
Well, we saved a lot, because with when consulting, maybe for just CK certificate, people charge 2,500, and we probably spent 500 just for CK certificates. So we saved quite much, but however, we had to, push in order for us to get more money and continue with the business and also sustain the business, which was not so easy, because you approach big companies and then they say to you, what have you done?
So there's no experience, and they won't give you business because you don't have experience. And because they can't give you business because you don't have experience, you're never going to get the experience.
Yes, and they said to us, how do we trust you? Because you don't have anything that you can say, we've done this, and we promise to do this in return. So it was really hard for us to get funding. But however, we worked on that by venturing into small businesses, and small businesses were the ones that were able to help us start up our business and also get partners with different businesses that do the same thing as us.
Which is what?
We have Siafunda CTC. We've partnered with it. It has 10 centers in Tembisa. So we're able to go to a school and ask for a certain number of learners, take them to the center because it has computers, it has internet connection. So we save on hiring a hall, hiring gadgets for students to.
And we have interviewed Siafunda a couple of times on the show, so I know exactly who they are.
Yes.
All right. As we speak now, your company is 2 years old. You have 2 partners. Are you now profitable?
Yes.
And you're saying to the big smile, that's wonderful. Congratulations. So you are profitable. What does the future look like for your 2? You're the co-founder of Ubunye Venture and GH Tech Innovation.
Yes.
They're 2 totally separate entities.
Yes.
Okay, what does the future look like for you? How are you going to grow your company?
Well, we're hoping on growing our company with partnering with a lot of schools in around our area, because now we've heard that in 2021 they'll be introducing a new curriculum which they will need us as coders to help them teach the learners or teach the teachers in order for the teachers to teach the learners. I don't know how. But however, we're hoping on, partnering with those schools so that we can help them get the skills and give them our curriculum, because we designed our curriculum. So we're hoping on selling our curriculum to different organization, to different schools. And
okay, GH is an NPC and Ubunye is an NPO. What's the difference and what have you put back into your community?
Okay, well, an NPC, which is Ghetto Heroes Tech Innovation, it's a non-profit company. That means we are allowed to make a profit, but to a certain extent.
What is the extent? What's the cutoff?
I think it's 1 million. So we are allowed to make a profit to a certain extent. But when we get to that amount, then we have to, if we get more, then we have to donate.
Okay.
So an NPO, it's a non-profit organization. So a non-profit organization is not allowed to make any profit. So you
put that money back into the community?
Yes.
How?
What we do is we help with young people that are really wanting to learn coding, but they don't have the funds to pay and get the services. We do that for free.
Okay.
So we host what we call #GH Code Tembisa, and then we invite all young people and unemployed youth to come and get the skills for free.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And we do have one that have already started their own business, which is Ernest Manjati. He got the skills from us, and now he's transferring the skills, but getting money from people.
That's wonderful. And that's where we have to leave it. Your message to young people, very especially unemployed young people, what do you want to say to them?
Well, what I want to say to young people is that nothing comes easy. And if you are at home relaxing and sitting back and saying life is hard, life is not easy, you got to get up and make things happen. Because I live by a drive that says #possibilities starts within. It has to start within so that it can give the results outside. But with that being said, what I mean is that you have to have a vision and what you want, and you have to live by a drive. So whatever that you want to do, it's possible, but it's a matter of you studying with that possibility within so that it can come out and you can get going and you can continue with your life.
Make your future a possibility. Thank you indeed for being with us. Much success for the future. And that then brings us to the end of the show. And as the young, lovely lady has just said to us, believe in yourself, trust in yourself, get off that couch and make things start working for you. Things are not going to fall into your lap. And also just remember, coding is the language of the future. Thank you for your company. Thank you to the hard-working production team. Please take care on the roads. Until the next time, which is Saturday morning, it is Assalamu alaikum and Khudafiz from me, Julie.